Photography Daily is a Loading Zone production.
We are going to have all seasons weather-wise on the show today because it's a really strange weather day today. Right now, let me make a picture to start the show. We've got this beautiful contrasty light. The sunshine beaming down this path, and I've chosen to come along a path today because I need a little bit of cover from the wind, because otherwise all you're going to hear is white noise for the entire podcast. Let me get a picture here. I'm going to shoot into the sun, so I hope this is going to work, because it will give you an idea. This path that I'm walking along here. Hold on, pop you in my pocket. Well, I've chosen to make my photo walk today, so that is extreme. I'm going to have to underexpose. It's also very cold, by the way, so I don't think my mouth is going to catch up with my thoughts. Shutter speed, 1000th, f5, ISO 160. Here we go. Another one of those. A couple for the sketchbook. Just take you out of my pocket. Right, I'm going to start today with a story about punk music. What? Where are you going to go with this, Neil? Well, it morphs into photography. I was a little bit late for punk music. Well, to be amongst it in the mosh pit, at least. I was in short trousers when punk was at its height, and my mum and dad, they were far more into Paul McCartney and the Carpenters. Easy listening out of our mahogany radiogram. So while Johnny Rotten was belting out, I wanna be anarchy, that was my best Johnny Rotten, by the way, we were more likely at 13 Cumberland Close to be listening to McCartney, singing about the Jailer Man and Sailor Sam. But then, aged 16, came the John O'Gaunt pub in Hertford. My first big DJ gig, and where my musical education changed. Whilst I wasn't legally old enough to drink, I managed to bag myself this DJ residency at the John O'Gaunt pub, which was opposite my school gates. This quiet, unassuming kid who was, pretty much ropey at every subject except for bits of art and English, I was suddenly elevated to almost cool. So there I was, Friday and Saturday nights with my disco unit, which had a terrible flashing light display made out of an old garden trellis that my mum didn't want anymore. We kind of fixed some bulbs to it, and that was it. But what I did have was a thumping big sound system. For those that don't know about or remember these things, they were Roger Squire mini bins that made the windows rattle like a Chinook helicopter. And, that's when I finally found punk. 4 years after Sid Vicious had gone to knock the rivets out the pearly gates, I was learning that there was more to life than rainy days and Mondays, though the Carpenters do remain my guilty secret pleasure. Don't tell anybody. Neil, they're mine too. Really? Together, you and I? Right. Don't tell anybody else, though. But seeing that the John O'Gaunt had the kind of drinkers who would have turned the tables over if I played anything by Spandau Ballet or Duran Duran, my record collection, well, that took a sharp left turn at the traffic lights, and the box was full of, the Damned and Angelic Upstart and Sex Pistols and Public Image and Buzzcocks. Yeah, the latter being very relevant for today. Favourite song at 10:30 p.m. each Friday night in that joint began with a cool "Ahoy Scurvies!" and the bar staff would shut the bar for 3 minutes and 31 seconds while all hell broke loose. If you know that song, you'll know why. So in an odd way, the tables kind of got turned over anyway, just not to the dulcets of Tony Hadley. It was a sharp education for a lad from the Shires, brought up on a diet of what Mum and Dad thought sounded nice with Yorkshire puddings. Even some of my schoolmasters, as they were called in those days, they drank in the Gaunt. So I began to score a few points with them too. Oh, James, looks like you've got character after all. Thank you, sir. 38 years ago this was. 38 years. Now, the John of Gaunt was knocked down a few years back to make way for retirement living apartments, which probably now are home, ironically, to some of the ne'er-do-wells, as my dad would call them. They used to trash that joint and threaten me constantly with a redesigned face if I didn't play their songs. And the worst of the lot was a guy called Eggy, who was the local ne'er-do-well, only with a kind of nickname that sounded like a sandwich, but you didn't say it to his face, obviously. And dear old Mr. N that we mentioned last week, who is one of the schoolmasters that used to throw bald rubbers at the kids in art class. In the days you were allowed to throw bald rubbers at the kids in art class, he used to go to that pub, and he had a table in the corner with a few of the other teachers who set up court every Friday there after school until closing time, though you couldn't really see them on account of the fact they were all sitting in a smog created by old woodbine, in the days you were allowed to sit in a smog created by old woodbine. So you see, I have this affection for punk, born of that pub and my DJ residency in that place where your boots really did stick to the carpet decorated by cheap lager. But things move on, don't they? The John of Gaunt, as I say, was condemned and is now a retirement home. And I bet you, Eggy has got his own residency in Isabella House, quietly humming The Cabin Boy Was Flipper while brewing a cup of tea. My twin decks of sound have been swapped for twin card slots and a camera. And the places I go to on a Friday night, well, they're usually off the beaten track now and much, much quieter. And that probably goes for my guest as well, who at the same kind of age swapped his school books for a job in music as well, though his first gig wasn't in a pub serving the great unwashed of Hartford. No, John Mayer, my guest, became a drummer in a punk band called Buzzcocks, who are widely considered to be a seminal influence on the Manchester music scene. And in their first big gig, they weren't appeasing a bloke with a daft name like Eggy. No, they were supporting the Sex Pistols at the infamous Lesser Free Trade Hall. John Mayer has swapped those days for a life behind a camera now on an island best part of 400 miles from the music scene that he helped influence.
Today on the Photowalk.
On Harris, you just think, well, it's such a safe environment. You know, I can go out and I've done things like set up long exposure photographs that last maybe half an hour to an hour. You know, when you wanted to get star trails and stuff, and I've literally just left the camera. It's like I'm standing here for an hour and I go back to the van and have a few cups of coffee and a packet of Jaffa cakes.
Stories of life told by photographers, and today the stories come from John Mayer and you. It's a special and unique podcast made out on location, me with my camera, you with yours, earbuds in, a flask of coffee, a packet of my favourite Garibaldis, and a mailbag full of letters as we walk. These photo walks are inspired from and by those letters you send in and the pictures you send too of where you've been walking and your thoughts on why photography means so much to you. I'll tell you what's in today's mailbag in a moment after I share my thanks to mpb.com for sponsoring this time we spend together walking. mpb.com is the #1 company in the UK, the US and Europe, with bases in Brighton, say it with me, Brooklyn and Berlin when it comes to buying, selling and trading used camera kit online. And they're a company I use myself. They help photographers like me and like you to buy, trade and sell our kits online confidently. And they have proper guarantees upon what you buy with product specialists who are photographers and creators who've been answering questions you send in. Today, it's from Alex Dukeman. So far, I've not used any kind of off-camera flash, says Alex. What suggestion would you have for successfully using them in a portrait setting? And from MPB, starting out with flash, it's worth investing in a flash that's able to be used in both manual and TTL modes. Having a flash
that has the ability to use both modes will give you more range during your portrait sessions. Start out using TTL. It's the biggest pro. It's automated and does the thinking for you. Once you've mastered that, moving into manual will allow you to explore the lighting options and styles that suit your photography. Send your questions to the email address studio@photographydaily.show. Sell the kits you're not using, trade it in for the stuff that you need to create. Buy used, spend less, and get more at mpb.com. Our patrons also keep these boots walking, and we'll hear from some of those later on. Today, we talk about burnout. We also introduce you on the show to a must-watch film. It's the P word, projects, again. And it seems the most wonderful projects are the simple ones that aren't exotic necessarily. A life lesson today I know you'll love. We have an attack of the aliens during a photo walk. It's not quite as bad as it sounds. Spectacular shots from a mailman, and you need hands. Or rather, you need pictures of hands. And as always, we enjoy some inspiration from former guests and wonderfully talented photographers from around the world. Shall we walk then? Checklist out. Coffee and Garibaldi's. Check. Boots on and laced. Check. Walking trousers or shorts and long socks for those who are walking amongst those nasty things we've been talking about. Check. Spare batteries. Check. Film or cards. Check. Earbuds in. Check. Lens caps off. Let's walk.
We're going from absolute beautiful sunshine today and shouting at you in the introduction, I feel I might have been, through to calm, very calm moments, and then really windy moments. I mean, we had sleet earlier today. Last week, there I was, practically bathing in the sunshine. And this week, it feels like we're back in winter again. Anyway, thank you for the letters that you send in, for your comments on the website show pages, and our Instagram, and your picture stories in the Facebook group. I have, and I mean this, a deep sense of pride when you share what you share, because sometimes they're very sensitive stories and thoughts. So please keep sending them in, large or small, with pictures or without pictures, to studio@photographydaily.show. to studio@photographydaily.show. A couple from, I think we'll start with Facebook this week, a couple for starters. The wonderful group, if you are not a member, dive in please. There's some fantastic photographers and just generally creatives in there. It's not one of these groups where, well, I've said this before. Did I say it last week? You might well have done, Neil. Well, I'll say it again. It's not one of those groups where you feel daft for asking questions. No question too daft, unless it's from me, obviously. But we'll start with Facebook. Remember we talked about professional burnout on an episode a couple of weeks back, and one of our patrons, Andrew Higgins, shared on Zoom what that moment, I had a conversation with him, and he shared what that moment actually felt like for him. He went to cover what you might call, well, a bread and butter news story for him as a local newspaper photographer. And he spied an incredible film called Unflinching Grace, featuring 3 photojournalists. They are Paula Bronstein, Carol Guzzi, and Yoongi Kim. It's half an hour long, and I've included the film on the show page today, which the show page, of course, has a link within your podcast player app to find. Trust me, you will be, and we're going to use this word quite a lot this week, you will be all the richer, creatively richer that is, and empathically in your picture making for watching this film. I've seen it a couple of times now, and it is fantastic. Anyway, Andrew wrote as a message for you. If you have an interest in photojournalism, then you absolutely won't regret watching this short documentary about 3 great photographers and their wonderful work. Neil talked to me about burnout on the podcast, but what I didn't really mention is how I overcame that time in my career. And you're right, we didn't go into that. We should have done. opportunity lost, because that would have been a good part of the story. We shall have to reconvene, Andrew, won't we? Yes. And so I, like Andrew, hope you may have 30 minutes to take in the words within the film that talk about making pictures, not just on, because these are very, very well-established, well-respected photojournalists internationally. And so the words aren't just about being on the front lines and in war-torn areas, but a more nuanced message about the power, or if you like, the very personal empowerment that photography brings to us, all of us, particularly during challenging times, whatever type of photography that we practice. But I think I was watching the film again, must be 3 or 4 times now then, but I think Yoongi Kim sums it up particularly powerfully. She's one of the photographers in the film. She's also actually the I didn't note this before, but this time in the credits I noted that she was also the executive producer of the film. She says, I've been doing this 40 years. Who'd have thought the journey that I've had, the people that I've met, my life is, here comes that word, my life is richer because of it. My life is richer because of it. I think that says everything, doesn't it, about carrying that box with film or a card in it. Right, next, Scott Glasgow. Listening to the podcast, says Scott, has got me taking my camera out on more routine walks from home along the seafront, generally walking the dog. I've been thinking about starting a project for a while, and like many people it seems, was struggling to identify one, and I was rather overthinking it. The recent podcasts have been talking about projects not needing to be complex and grand as we feel they should be. Out on one of my walks last night, I saw a glove, and he's given us the picture so you can see it on the website page. I saw a glove placed on top of the prom fence, which is a common occurrence. One that sees people placing a value on inanimate objects, easy for me to say. Discarded, lost and left behind, found and put in a prominent place by somebody in the hope that the owner will return and feel that feeling of relief that the item was saved and put in a safe place. And this got me thinking of a simple project documenting the objects left behind. And when I read your words, this light bulb just went ping, Scott. It did, it really did. Because I too, I've not made a project out of it, but I too noticed these things that are left behind. And from time to time, I've made some pictures of them. You've probably seen them in the show notes as my sketchbook images when I've been making my walks. But they are so often lovingly placed and prominently placed, yes, for certain, because when you find something, you think, oh, that's a shame. I think the biggest shame is when you find teddy bears, isn't it? And you think, oh no, who lost that? That's somebody's loved teddy. And you try and put it somewhere where it won't blow away or a dog won't come along and savage it. But you're right, these things that are placed in prominent places to be found again. So today, he says, I headed out with that project in mind and came across another glove, as you do, then some Wellington boots sat on a log, and later a quite sinister looking doll sat atop a bin. Yes, it was. Oh, it is. Very sinister looking. You'll see that on the show page too. These made for interesting shots, I thought. And like my street photography, I don't intend to reposition or touch any of the objects I find, as the idea is that they've been placed by somebody in that position, and it's therefore a major part of these mini stories. Do let me know what you think of this very early stage project. All the best, thanks, Scott. Well, Scott, I'm including these pictures taken on your Photowalk on the show page today, as I say. What do I think? Well, I think it's a fantastic idea. That probably came across just a moment ago. I think it's inspired. It's light bulb, ping, isn't it? It's you know, for the simplicity, it's an excellent project, and it's one that you can probably do for years, finding these things and just updating gradually. Actually, it's as a personal project, there's somebody right at the end of today's show who works on similar sort of personal project ideas across years and years. I'll come to him later on. But also, funnily enough, on the project tip, I was shooting a wedding at the weekend, and the father of the bride I noticed he had a couple of cameras with him, so clearly we got chatting about photography. And clearly, Neil, why clearly? Well, a couple of cameras, got to be interested in photography. And I'm always looking for a new listener. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Anyway, we got talking about photography, and he told me about this fantastic project that he is working on. He doesn't work as a photographer. He works in the tow bar industry. But this project came from a book that his wife had bought him, and then he had his light bulb moment. But I'm going to tell that story in the Patreon More show tomorrow. There's a tease, Neil. Oh, I know. So yeah, projects. We talk often about projects. Projects are good for the soul, definitely. I'd like to rewind for a moment for our first inspirational clip today to that film that Andrew mentioned called Unflinching Grace. One of the three photographers, Carol Guzzi, mentioned in an onstage appearance how empathy is one of the main aspects of making pictures. And you don't have to go to say a war zone to find or feel that. I was thinking long and hard about the empathy that I believe I felt in my picture making process, and in particular it comes back probably to events like funerals that I've photographed, particularly one for a baby boy, and we've talked about that on the podcast before. And then closer to home, I think of photographing people who I know have come through personal hardships to wear their smiles in a portrait session. And that can extend, can't it, into natural work, wildlife work, and I think landscape work as well. But here's Carol sharing a few words about that subject.
I definitely was born with an overdose of empathy, and you're right, it's a double-edged sword. It's a blessing and a curse. I think it certainly helps you create images that resonate more with viewers, because I almost become that person. It's like being a chameleon and putting on their skin, and I feel what they're feeling so deeply that hopefully it translates to the photo so that someone else can connect in the same way. And try to understand. You can never walk in someone else's shoes, really, but our challenge is to tell their story, as best as possible. So, empathy is the key word. But at the same time, personally, my heart's been broken probably 10,000 times harder than an average person in many, many ways.
That's Carol Guzzi. And I will link to a National Geo film where she shares the complete story. Well, as complete as a 60-minute keynote interview allows, when you consider her amazing career, the complete story of her life behind a lens. Right, 365 time. If you haven't seen our 365 feature on the website, please, where have you been? Oh, I'm brand new to the podcast now. Oh, that's a fair excuse. We have a 365 feature on our website, and it's really there for those that would like to participate in a 365 but don't want to make an image every single day. So we have a community one, and we throw some pictures in from time to time, and it's kind of they're randomly placed, not always randomly placed. Sometimes they follow each other in kind of diptych or even triptych style. But you're invited to send in your pictures, as I call it a geographical blog of the world, because it's wonderful to see where you are, and these pictures that you send in certainly paint a picture of the countries that you and the places that you live in. So thank you for them. Send them into studio@photographydaily.show. That is the email address, 2,000 pixels wide, or on the long side, as we say. And they can be colour or black and white, landscape orientated or portrait or square, however you shoot. As always, a super week of 365s so far. But I'm going to highlight yesterday's number 211 in the series by Robert Squire. Not to be confused with Roger Squire, the man behind the bass bin disco speaker that I mentioned right at the head of the show. And as far as I know, not family. There are other Squires, Neil, yes. I appreciate that. Robert wrote me a letter with his image for 365, a fabulous story. You can see the picture on the website, on the 365 page. It'll be yesterday's if you're listening to this on the appropriate Friday. If you're not, just follow the link. But the story that he sent in, well, that stands alone beautifully too. So here goes. Hello, Neil. Thank you so much for assembling this community. That's quite a nice thought, actually. I quite like that. I've been exposed to many wonderful photographers thanks to it, and my Instagram feed is much, here comes that word, is much richer for it. Thank you, Robert. We're all proclaiming levels of photographic wealth today, it would seem. A few years ago, says Robert, and by a few I mean 9, few gets larger the older I get, I did a 365 of my own. I started on October the 2nd, with total disregard for the Gregorian calendar, much the same as we did, really. I mean, we didn't start October 2nd, I know, but we didn't start on Jan 1, did we? Because I saw something pretty, he says, on my way to work, and that was the reason I started. And this photo is from that project. So I like this. It's sort of historically significant as a picture. And because we're talking about music today and photography on the show, this letter seems to, I think it fits all the better. See, we don't simply throw this thing together. There's a large helping of coincidence and custard. Robert says, I'd heard a single song by this band called A Silent Film on a local public radio station. They're a small band, and this is the type of radio station that plays bands that you don't really hear elsewhere. When I heard that they were playing at one of my favourite venues in Philadelphia, I decided to go despite the fact that my wife had already made other plans for us, and everyone else I'd asked turned me down. But a much younger co-worker was already there with some of her friends when I arrived, and I kind of made peace with the idea of being the oldest person in attendance. After getting a beer from the bar, I settled into a spot just behind the mixing booth. See, it's a pretty good place to... I always think it's a good place. Obviously, you can't do it at stadium venues, no. But in smaller, more intimate venues, put yourself near the mixing box. Because generally, not always, but generally, that's one of the best acoustic places to really hear what's going on as the sound comes back at you. There's a reason they put sound boxes where they do, often. As I say, not always. During the opening act, a considerably older woman, steady, Robert, though I'm allowing you this for context, a considerably older woman, don't say it again, stood beside me and was cheering loudly, but in between songs, shouting, "We're ready for silent film! Bring on silent film!" I was in my mid-40s at the time. She was, I think, in her late 60s. We got chatting between bands, and, she was pretty much as open book as I am. She was there with her niece, who she explained struggled with social anxiety, so she was hoping concerts could help break her of that. Once the headliners took to the stage, she sang along and danced, and periodically commented, "This is their best song, this is their best song, this is their best song." Apparently, they're all their best songs. At around midnight, she said, "I need to take my medication now. Can I have a sip of your beer?" She took a pill organiser from her purse and swallowed whatever it was along with the beer that I'd just purchased, completely. Right. When the show was over and the lights had come up, I thanked her for making the night so much fun. She motioned me to lean across. "I have some advice for you," she said. "As long as you're able to do it as much as you can." And then she turned and left with her niece in tow. And that was that. This photo, and the photo will be on the show page today, this photo will remind me forever of that person who turned an okay but lonely night into something special. If anyone is interested, the song that maybe want to see them is "You Will Leave a Mark," and I think that's very apposite, isn't it? Very appropriate, because she certainly left a mark with you, with that story. And that, Robert, is, it's brilliant. The whole thing is brilliant. And such a simple but potent piece of advice, isn't it? As long as you're able to do it as much as you can. Fabulous. And it reminds me so much of dear Tom Stoddart, the late Tom Stoddart, the photojournalist. At the end of a film interview that I did with Tom long before I presented this podcast, and long before actually my other Fuji flavoured one with my reprobate buddy Mullins, I recorded Tom reminiscing about his time behind the lens, much like we heard, really, I suppose, from Carol Guzzi just a moment ago. And I'd like to play you one of my favourite clips from that film, and it's part of one of our earlier podcasts now on this channel, and it's complemented by the wonderful piece of advice that I just read to you there, or the story that we just heard. As long as you're able to do it as much as you can. Tom Stoddart had his own advice for doing what you love always.
I'm a great kind of believer that, and I tell young photographers this all the time, that they're not shooting for the next day or the next week or the next month. They're shooting for the next 20 years, 25 years, especially if they're on an important event. As I say, I've been around, this is my 46th year as a professional, and it's amazing how many times photographs I shot 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I mean, the Berlin Wall is a point in case. I happened to be, by chance, by luck, on the Berlin Wall the night it opened. I was at Checkpoint Charlie when the very first people came through, and it seems like yesterday, and in fact it was November the 9th, 1989, and the pictures I shot that night are still being used.
When do you stop?
You never stop. Why would you stop?
Never?
I don't see the point of stopping, and why stop when you enjoy it so much, and it's such an amazing way of living.
Tom Stoddart. And I'll also link to or put the film actually on the show page that I made about him today, which might seem a little bit self-indulgent for me to put one of my films on there, but Tom tells a wonderful story about the sliding door moments that, many wonderful stories about the moments that led him to making some of the most important news stories for world press. As for the 365 and all the letters you send them to studio@photographydaily.show. 2,000 pixels on the long side, square, portrait or landscape. Right, let me introduce you to my guest this week, and it was difficult for me not to hero worship, as really Buzzcocks were a strong feature of my DJing and musical coming of age, and Ever Falling in Love was a real anthem of my time in radio as well. But I'm always fascinated by why bands are called what they are, and as this was an interview I was trying to guide toward the photography, I really missed it out. So let me fill you in with some detail there. You may be saying, or at least thinking, but Neil, you're not saying the band name properly. It's the Buzzcocks. The Buzzcocks, Neil. The. You're missing it off. And for our listeners outside the UK, Buzzcocks were called Buzzcocks after the founders read the headline, "It's the Buzzcock," in a review in the music part of an all-important magazine called Time Out. The buzz is the excitement of playing on stage, and cock is Northern English slang meaning friend. Just in case you were grimacing awkwardly there, thinking I'm going to have to explain this to the kids listening in the car at the moment. Our friend Mally, of course, speaks Northern, and he says sithee, as in see thee, or see you later kind of thing. So there we go. It's a whole new language. You don't have to travel far in the UK for a whole new language or different language. But Buzzcocks, the band, thought it captured the excitement of the nascent punk scene, as well as having humorous connotations following Pete Shelley's, he's one of the founders, time working in a Bolton adult shop. And I shall stop there while I'm ahead. So per the band, there is no the in Buzzcocks. Bit of wiki reference in there for you as well. So it's music, it's photography, and the story of somebody who's found photography slightly later in what we loosely refer to as a career life. So grab your drumsticks. Here we go. This is John Mayer.
John, I do want to start with a question of how you got this incredible opportunity to join the British punk band Buzzcocks. Well, while you were still at school, approaching your O-levels, you had no idea what was about to happen to you. How did the invite even come about?
Well, I got a knock on the front door. I'd just come home from school during lunch hour. Yeah. It was at the time I was doing my O-levels, and there was a knock on the door because I'd responded to an advert in the Melody Maker, and she was looking for beginner musicians to get together and kind of like just learn things together.
Yeah.
And it turned out she was a drummer, and she said, I think she got the impression that I was way more advanced than her. I'd only had my kit 5 or 6 weeks.
5 or 6 weeks, yeah.
And she agreed to take. I don't think we even had a phone in the house at the time. She took my address anyway, and she said if anybody got in contact looking for a drummer, she would pass my name on. And sure enough, Howard Devoto, who was then, the lead singer of Buzzcocks at that point, he saw the same ad in Melody Maker and contacted her, figuring that it'd be quite nice to have a female drummer, a bit like the Velvet Underground had. Yeah. She ducked out of that, but passed on my address. And then Howard called round. Quite a weird encounter. I asked him, well, what kind of music is it that you do? And he sort of thought for a second, and he just described it as high energy pop.
Yeah.
And I thought he invited me around for a rehearsal at his this windowless basement flat in Salford the following Saturday. It wasn't really like an audition as such. It was just I went along. They said, well, we've got these songs, and they just counted them in. They were at breakneck speed, and I joined in. And when we did that for a while, they said, okay, you're all right for coming back next week?
Yeah, I mean, you famously opened for the Sex Pistols. It was your first gig. I mean, I know you've been asked 9,007 times, John. I'll make it 9,008. But what was it like to be at the very centre of the British punk scene? I mean, you didn't even know who the Pistols were when you went on stage that night, did you?
No, not at all. It was very much driven by Howard and Pete Shelley. Yeah. They actually organised that gig in Manchester for the Pistols. Yeah. And, Malcolm McLaren said to Howard, well, you get yourself your band together in time and you can support us. I can remember, we were hanging around at the Lesser Free Trade Hall, for that first gig. We got there before the Pistols did, and they roll in at the back of the hall, and there's this kind of commotion and people shouting and stuff, and they strolled in, and it really was a moment of like, oh my God, what is happening? Just what can you do? I've made my bed.
It wasn't a bad one to lie in. Those who aren't lucky enough to have ever heard my personal radio hero John Peel broadcast won't necessarily get the next few moments of nostalgia. But John was quite the fan of yours, wasn't he? Really, you did plenty of Peel sessions, which was at the time a sort of much desired spot to hold on British radio, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I think we did 3 for John Peel. We never actually met him.
Did you not?
No, we got booked into Maida Vale Studios, and we had the engineer and the producer guy was there. Yeah. And we treated it just as like a great bit of studio time. I think it's fair to say, if you go back to those sessions, I think we did either 3 or 4 songs each session. Yeah. And so 2 or 3 of those would be ones that we knew well and we'd been playing live for some time. And then we also used those sessions as a bit of an experiment, because there'd usually be a new song that wasn't quite figured out. Yeah. And we used the Peel session as an excuse. So, well, we kind of know it, but let's put a version of it down. And it's really interesting listening back to those sessions, because I remember moving away from the Pulse Beat was one, and Late for the Train was quite, for us, very experimental. Yeah. And they're very different to the album versions, but actually sort of in a way kind of more interesting, because you could see the idea coming together.
Well, Buzzcocks with you at the drums went on to become an important force in not just punk music, but the establishment of that famous Manchester music scene. But I wonder, did the kid that got asked to be a punk rock star actually go back into school? Did you pass your chemistry exam in the end?
I did. Yeah. I got a C. I got 7 in all. There were a few C's in there. I got a couple of B's. I think music and history.
Yeah.
And then probably the one I'm most proud of is the religion. I got U. I believe that's unclassified.
Well, I got a few of those, John. In fact, I think you was my chemistry result, so you would definitely do better than me with a Bunsen burner.
Yeah, I did. I scraped through, basically. It wasn't like some kind of childhood prodigy genius or whatever at school.
Well, you were a self-taught musician. The same goes for the second love, not necessarily in that order of your life, VWs and mechanics. And if Buzzcocks were an influence in punk and for Manchester music, Mr. Beetle, your car, Volksworld magazine declared, and I'm going to quote it, one of the cars that shaped the scene. That scene being VW drag racing. I'm fascinated by where the interest came from, though, because you didn't have any formal training for that either.
No, it was actually the first bit of money that a lump of money. Well, when I say a lump, it was £1,000. That was a payment we each got from sales of Spiral Scratch. That first, independent EP.
Yeah.
And at the time, I mean, I passed my driving test when I was 17. My dad was very instrumental in pushing us, or the three of me and my two sisters.
Yeah.
For some reason wanted us to get driving. My first car was an Austin 1100, and then it got to a point where I thought I need to sort of step up a bit, and for whatever reason, I don't know, I wasn't searching for a Beetle, but one came along, and so did this £1,000 from Spiral Scratch, and that's what it got spent on. For some reason, once I got that Beetle, I got really hooked into it and started working on it, and this evolved into pulling engines apart. Also, around about getting mid to late 80s, the VW scene in the UK, the air-cooled VWs, they were getting kind of into this drag racing thing, but there'd never been a drag race dedicated to Volkswagen Beetles. And then I think the first one was in 1987, which I went along to. In a weird way, it was a bit like the atmosphere and the excitement involved in that scene in the early days. I equated that to the early days of punk because it was new and it was a fresh thing. And I just felt that I wanted to be a part of, to play a part in that and basically go racing. Yeah. And that's how that Mr. Beetle race car came about.
Do you still have Mr. Beetle?
No, that actually got written off. I crashed it really badly at York Raceway in 1980. I think it was 89. I'd only had it going a couple of years. I got into a real bad barrel roll thing at the end of the track. Apparently went over 6 times. I wasn't hurt, but the car was a complete write-off.
Total. Music, engineering, photography. I wonder if there was an element of the interest in photography from your days in Buzzcocks, where imagery played an important role in the band's life. I mean, I did see a collection of your street pictures on your blog from 1979 when you went to New York. So maybe it was in the blood, and maybe it was you didn't know quite then that it would become a major part of your life, or did you?
No, I didn't. I suppose a lot of people have an interest in photography. I mean, going back to that bunch of pictures from 79, I mean, that's relatively recently that I unearthed the original 35mm negs of those and rescanned them, and that's what I posted on. So that's what you'll have seen. But that was my first ever camera my own camera. I bought that Olympus trip specifically because we were going to America, and at the time, I was sort of getting interested in cinema. You would go and see things like Mean Streets and Taxi Driver, All the President's Men. So but also the stuff on TV. Myself and my dad would sit there watching episodes of Kojak, and so this imagery of America, it's very strange. It's like the first time you go there, it's so exciting. And you get the cab into the centre of New York, and it's just like you're just looking out the windows, and you've never been there before, but it looks familiar just because you've seen so much of it before. So I just felt there's no way I could go on that trip over there and not take a camera with me. So I got the cheapest and most basic point and shoot camera. £50, wasn't it? It was about that, yeah. Yeah, which was actually a lot of money back then. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And it was the Olympus trip was the David Bailey advert, wasn't it? I remember that. That's the one. And I've got one in the cabinet over there. So I had a cursory glance at it because before we opened the microphones today. There's an entirely different energy in your photographic work from those days and
your work with high performance tuning of cars and where you are now, really. It's a sort of yin and yang, really, because your photography is a lot more contemplative, isn't it? It's quieter.
Yeah. It took me a long time to figure out. I mean, I didn't use a camera. We moved up here in 2002.
Yeah.
And I didn't use a camera literally until 2009, I think, because I wasn't motivated to go out taking pictures because I hadn't figured out a way of taking anything that would be of interest to me until I stumbled into that world of long exposure night photography. And yeah, that's fantastic because that's going out under the light of a full moon.
Yeah.
It's very quiet around here. You've not got cars whizzing by you all the time, and just taking one single picture, you might be stood there for 6 minutes. That's how long the shutter's open, just waiting and waiting for that time to elapse before you might have something that will make a useful picture. So it is, very sort of relaxing way of going about things, I suppose.
Why night photography, though? What got you into that?
It was seeing a documentary on TV with the photographer that they were following around in the deserts of California was a guy called Troy Paver. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he uses a lot of coloured light. You'll see that in my early night photos, because basically what I was doing was aping what he'd been doing. It took me a while to learn what I was doing. I was kind of just doing it, not understanding what was going on, and massive novelty factor involved, because when you take those shots, of course, if you're adding light into the scene, the end result, that still image, is something that you physically haven't seen with your eyes. So that, say, it is a bit of a novelty, and it's easy to get carried away thinking, oh wow, look what I've just made. But when you sit back and analyze it more in depth and think about it more, you think, well, actually, it might just be a shot that's got some weird lights and you think it's cool. But with practice, I learned that what I got interested in was the way I moved away from using the coloured lights, but I learned that I could use light in a way to make the picture almost more three-dimensional. And when you've got the advantage of several minutes to work with, actually painting that light in, it gives you the time to do that, much more so than if you're trying to create that kind of work, a lit shot in daylight where it has to be done in a snap of a second.
You use a large format camera. You're the second photographer in as many days that I've spoken to probably feel this is the camera that provides their voice. Why did you choose that as your tool?
Using the 4x5, that came about really is when I was first approached to participate in an exhibition that was up in Stornoway on the Isle of Lewis. And of course, having gone to that gallery many a time and seen various exhibitions in there was one in particular by a guy called Murdo MacLeod, who's from the Isle of Lewis. He does a lot of work for The Guardian and The Observer. Yeah. Brilliant photographer, and he uses light really well. And that exhibition of his, there were very large prints, really good quality, but very large. That kind of thing has an impact that a little A4 in a frame just will never have. And I thought, well, I won't be able to afford to do all the prints of that size, but I've got to do at least some. But then the question comes, how do you produce a really high quality print that's maybe 6 foot wide? And certainly the digital, the DSLR I was using at the time, that wasn't going to hack it. And then weirdly enough, the same TV series that I'd seen Troy Paver on, this was a thing called Artland USA that was on Sky Arts channel. They did a little feature with another American photographer called Michael Eastman, and he had done a project called, I think it's called Vanishing America, and it was similar subjects to some of the stuff I've done, but he was going around shooting it with an 8x10 film camera. And then it went through this process where he was getting the 8x10 negatives digitally scanned at really high resolution. So then it could produce these incredible quality prints. That really intrigued me. So I started looking up, well, maybe I could afford one of these large format film cameras, whereas I can't afford a Hasselblad medium format digital, which is like, what are we talking? 20, 30, 40,000 pounds. It's like not even an option. I found a Sinar 4x5 camera on eBay for 210 quid. And I got a lens for 195. Bought a box of film for about 45 quid. And I also bought a couple of books so I could learn how to use the whole zone system thing. And they even got the old Pentax analog spot meter.
Yeah.
And a massive learning curve, but absolutely enjoyed every minute of it. I'm not even finished learning, am I? Because I'm still learning. But actually getting into that whole large format thing and getting those, I didn't at the time, I wasn't developing my own film. I was sending that away, and I got the film back, and I would scan it on my Epson V700 to see if it was even worth like thinking about taking it further. And the great thing about it was, and I think this is a lot of this is to do with that when you're going to shoot this film, you know, that old cliche, it slows you down, you take your time. I think you end up taking your time because you're worried about wasting £5 on a sheet of film. Most of them were absolutely fine, and those I sent away to get scanned on a proper drum scanner, and then I got those files back on a memory stick, and that was a joke as well, because when I first got the memory stick back with the files on, plugged it into my computer, I opened one of these up, the nearly one, what were they, massive files, 1 gigabyte per image, and then make a tiny little contrast change in Photoshop. And then my computer just froze. And I left it overnight, hoping when I got up in the morning that I've done it. And it's like, no. Ended up having to buy a new, more powerful computer to cope with the old film stuff.
So when you were doing these overnight shots, that then sort of morphs, doesn't it, into these fabulous pictures of you going inside some of the houses that you were photographing?
Well, it was the house thing that seemed to attract attention.
Yeah.
You know, that's when people started contacting me, wishing to, you know, do an article about the images or talk about them or whatever. Clearly struck a chord somewhere that my earlier efforts haven't got up to that level at that point.
It's incredible though, these houses, isn't it? The pictures I've seen of yours. These buildings are sometimes left with literally the newspapers on the table. It's almost like the 28 days later analogy. People have just left the house and it starts to get reclaimed by nature. I think I heard you say that would never happen in Manchester, back in Manchester. But when you walk in, they're practically untouched, aren't they?
Yeah, in many instances, it literally is a case of, like as you said, you know, stuff's been left behind, and it's just time has been allowed to take its toll on them. And there was just something that, well, I found it fascinating because I kind of got really addicted to going out searching for more of them. I think basically what it is, it's the so much of what I was looking at, I would recognise things. So some of these things would be familiar to me, and the fact that these things had been left there, it's hard to put into words really. It means that there was like a personal connection, not a personal connection for me. It means that you could almost feel like the presence of the people who've been there. So this just wasn't an empty building. This was it was a building that had been clearly occupied by people, because through the fact of them leaving so many personal belongings and possessions behind, it did have that kind of eerie Marie Celeste feel to it. And then it was a case of like trying to photograph it in a respectful way. You know, it's not the first person by any means that's gone in and done this kind of photography. I feel sort of responsible in a way, because there's a number of people who have come to the island, photographers who've possibly seen my work, or I know many of them have because they mention it in their YouTube videos, but you see them sometimes walking around with a selfie stick and talk. They're making the thing about themselves, whereas for me this was very much more about
the house,
you know, the people who'd lived there.
But you look like here and there that you do go back and maybe dress the scene. There were some, or maybe it was they were there anyway, the folded blankets on one of the beds, for example. That's exactly what it was like when you go in. Right, I haven't. I mean, I've done a little bit where, you know, if some bit of rubbish is in the way, or a chair like's fallen off and the chair's in the way or something, you know, I've got no qualms about moving that. But there are, because these houses, you know, more people have gone and photographed these than you think. And there's one I know for sure that because it's just down the road from a place that used to be a hostel, and there were a bunch of French photography students staying there for a few days, and they'd gone into this house, and I reckon they're the ones. This is
one where there's a blue Rayburn stove, and above the mantelpiece is a picture of a dog, and on one side a picture of a cat on the other, and they put a nice green jug on top of the stove. And there's a copy of Good Housekeeping magazine propped up on the mantelpiece, and that's just all too set up. But I thought, well, somebody set it up. It's like, I'm not going to go, do I move it around, trying to guess what it might have been like before they went in. So I just took a picture, presumably taking advantage of their setting up facility.
And John Mayer returns very soon. You can see John's work on the show page today. Just head to episode 288. Let's hear some ideas and inspiration from our patrons. Oh no, I'm being hailed on again. This is ridiculous. Look, can we just have spring back, please? Hope there's no dog walkers out. Not going down there, there's a man shouting. Photography Daily has an incredible community of supporters called patrons who I'm being hailed on. Can you hear that? Just light hail. No, Neil? Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. Our patrons who honestly keep me going through the hail, as it takes 3 production days a week to produce this unique style of show. So my personal and very, very sincere thanks to you. Patrons are a part of our Photography Daily Patreon, which is an app and a website where we have over 100 additional shows and posts that you can listen to through the Patreon app. Each month you can help support this show for the price of a cup of coffee or a roll of HP5 and help towards the cost of licensing the music we use and the platform that we're on and all those costs that go towards making a podcast and the time that it takes doing it, because I'm trying to make this into a much larger thing, a community of photographers where we can continue to help and encourage each other. So thank you if you've joined already, and if you're thinking about joining Patreon, thank you in advance very much. Let's meet at Patreon. Oh, by the way, you can join. Where do I join, Neil? Where do I join? You can join by going to the website, photographydaily.show. Look for the button that says Become a Patreon. Or does it say Supporter now? One of the two. Might even say both. I don't know, it's hailing. I'm just trying to keep my hands in one piece at the moment. And they're like blocks that are going to drop off. Come on, bring back these temperatures from last week. So let's, can you sense my frustration? So let's meet a patron. And it seems that aliens have invaded our friend Paul Hudson's walk. Hello, Neil. A fanfare of trumpets and a drum roll. I'm writing to Photography Daily for the first time. Well, the drum roll, really, I should leave that to John. I think he'd be the perfect person for that. As for trumpets, you really don't want to hear one, I'm sure. I went for a photo walk on Sunday to Hull. I might have mentioned the city to you the odd time during the Isle of Wight retreat. Yes, Paul was on the Isle of Wight retreat, and yes, he did mention Hull quite a few times. On the east side of the city, just beyond an interesting-looking industrial complex of huge oil storage tanks, what looks like a chemical manufacturing plant and cloud-emitting cooling towers, right next to the River Humber lies the village of Poole. No, surely not. They named a place after you. Okay, so it's got an extra L, but all the same, Poole, in Poole. I shall now refer to you as Lord Hudson of Hull, I think, if you've got a town named after you. Anyway, says Paul, with one less L, it was rather warm, so I left my famous comment-attracting Aran jumper at home. I should probably explain this, otherwise it becomes an in-joke. It seems that when Paul wears his Aran jumper, you might have to look up Aran jumper. He seems to attract trouble from the ne'er-do-wells of Hull land, or wherever he is when he wears his Aran jumper. I'm not quite sure. I mean, there must be something about your Aran jumper. Is it the pattern? Does it make people go slightly strange when they see it? There was a strange mist, he says, rolling over the river, a kind of sea fret, with the occasional tanker emerging ominously into view. Half an hour or so later, and the mist dissipated. I suddenly spotted a rather tall, what looks like white Dalek, seemingly heading in my direction. That'd be frightening. As I got closer to this alien creature, I realised it was static, and actually an old navigational light for ships leaving the port of Hull and sailing out into the river. And there was another one, and another one, a little less Dalek-like behind it. Nonetheless, worthy of a photograph, which I attach. Keep up the fantastic work. Hope to catch up with you soon. From Paul. Thank you, Paul. And yes, they do have a slight Dalek look to them. And I would imagine in the mist, they must have looked certainly ominous, yes. And I actually came across similar things when I went to do the Photowalk down in Kent, or up in Kent if you live in the Channel Islands, I suppose. There's no geography when you're doing a podcast that reaches all corners of the world. I should remember that. There's no north, south, east or west. But yes, I found in that mist, in that fog that day, right by the sea, I found some ominous things looming up out through the mist as I was making my photo walk. One of those being a lycra-clad speed demon that almost took me out by the jetty, but apart from that. Right, tomorrow on the Moore Show, which you will hear if you are a patron, a murder mystery condemned prison project, which I think I alluded to a short while ago. Such a great idea, and one given to me by this father of a bride that I met, who turns out to be keener than keen at the weekends on his bike with a camera. Let's hope he's not one of those lycra speed demons. Also, we have 5 things I love about photography, and here is a tease of just one of those things from Peter Geiser.
Okay, the first thing I love about photography is how much it's made me more aware of my surroundings and what's going on around me in terms of elements of interest or beauty, whether it's there's some little flower, a little stream, or sunlight hitting a tree, or actually something that's not pretty, but just interesting looking fence post or something like that. And so now I'm much more aware of everything around me and always putting a picture together in my head, even if I don't have my camera.
And I think a lot of us do that, don't we? We're seeing the picture, even minus a camera. I know I lament a moment of photographic opportunity if I see something and I don't have something to record it with. You know, far from it being a tool that some believers dumbed photography down, here's a conversation for another day. That's the good thing, isn't it, about carrying a phone with you that can make a decent representation of your ideas. I think it's a force for good, isn't it? Well, Neil, now you mention it, I don't happen to Don't be shouting that into the ether. Write it down, send it to me. studio@photographydaily.show. That's almost like one of those projects you got at school, isn't it? Smartphones, cameras, discuss, and a big sheet of white paper underneath and an hour and a half to answer. Ooh, a bit too open, perhaps, I don't know. I'll leave it to you. You're good at this sort of stuff, so much better than I, judging by your emails. Neil, you've slipped into your English self-derogatory posturing thing. I know, but actually I really get inspired by your words, and especially your pictures, and thank you for sending them in. Please keep sending them in to studio@photographydaily.show. And well, you know how some folks say, looking at that makes me want to give up. It's something that I hear quite a lot. I've got a feeling quite a close friend of mine does that from time to time. But actually, I've always been the other way. I mean, I saw that amazing Amazonia exhibition from my Brazilian hero Salgado, he with the enormous footballing knowledge. Now there's a linkage to something we talked about last week. And I wasn't thinking, stop the world, I want to give up now. I was thinking, hang on, hand me a helicopter, some bug spray. Let me at those incredible junglescapes too. A rainforest is a jungle as well, isn't it? I think it is. It's an either-or description, isn't it? I hope so. But this is my way of saying, do yourself a big creative favour. Get inspired and visit the show page today, because on there you are going to find the most beautiful pictures from our friend Matt Searles in New Zealand land, following on from last week's request to share the first images from your photo walk. Do you remember that bit? If you listen in order, and that's sequence of podcast to podcast, then yes, last week we started with a kind of a soundscape, really. I didn't do it this week, but then I did fear that it would just be the wind blowing through trees and nothing else, and that can sometimes just sound like white noise. But when we were doing that piece, I said, send me in your first picture from your photo walk, and Matt did, in style. He did. He wrote, "Hi Neil, hope all is well over there in Blighty Land. As requested, here's my first photo walk image from Saturday, as it is for us." Well, of course, because Friday photo walk for you is Saturday photo walk, isn't it? From Rangitata Valley. As is customary on my Daily Mail run, the ever-expanding Fujifilm kit called Shotgun, and was sitting on the front seat within grabbable range. Good. And you should see them. They are spectacular, as a particular judge might say on Strictly. Well, in the UK version anyway. Now, admittedly, we don't all... He's in the American version as well, isn't he? Yes. But now, admittedly, we don't all live next door to mountains like you do, but they certainly do take me to where you live in the world, and that's a great sign of a fantastic geographical blog picture. So thank you so much for them. Matt has, I think, the best, well, for him, mailman job in the world. Delivering mail with Mesopotamia as a backdrop. It's like living in a CGI'd studio movie set backdrop thing. Did that come out correctly? I hope so. But you know what I mean. It's fantastic. So yes, do go and see them on the show page today. Right, Monday. Show news. Yes, we have to do our show news. Yes, Monday. A new series of shows start. It is our assignment show, a 5 to 10 minute edition where various guests, many from the past, some surprises to come as well, will set you an assignment for the week to have you feeling or acting differently about your photography, to perhaps introduce you to a way of photographing that you hadn't thought of before, or a challenge that takes you off making a story in a way that you hadn't really considered before. It's so open as makes no odds. And I've just walked through stinging nettles. Ouch! These walking trousers, they're supposed to stop me being stung. Oh, yes. Oh, that's itching. Don't itch it, Neil, don't itch it. Oh, no. I want to itch. No, don't itch it. So, yes, it starts on Monday. It's our assignment show. And we're starting with a friend of the show, Sean Tucker, who is going to challenge you with an idea for the way that you think about your photography next week. And I will welcome pictures that you send in for that challenge, and I'll share them on the show page for each relevant assignment episode. Plus, we'll more than likely be talking about them on the photo walk now and then as well. But talking of our friend Sean, he has a new film out. It's called Making Portraits to Honour People, and features a wonderful photographer called Agenda Brown. And I will link to the film on the show page, and I will link to Agenda Brown within the show notes as well. Actually, I'll just put an embedded film on those show notes for you. But I talked recently with Sean about these interview series, which really do go in search of photographers that you may not be so familiar with. And he's pulled off, I think, another incredible film. And I feel, here's our new favourite word this week, richer for having happened across another talent, thanks to Sean's idea of speaking to photographers that we're not so familiar with. I know our good friend of the show, Hannah Gimblett, who you hear about from time to time, was very excited about this film, and she wrote to me about it during the week, and for good reason. I mean, this is about a photographer who entirely celebrates the the people that he makes portraits of, does agenda. But there is one moment from the film which I want to tease you with. I want to play an excerpt from it. And it's where Agenda is talking about making portraits, not of the face, but of an expressive part of the body that we've talked about on this show before. And it just proves that the way we see as photographers is such an inventive and potent force for good very often. Here's Agenda Brown talking to Sean Tucker.
My lifelong obsession has been with hands and how they can be used for a wide variety of things, from sort of brutal tasks to very delicate tasks. And I just had the time to really explore that, and that was a real blessing for me, I think. Before I created the hand project, I would have thought that shooting a face or photographing a face would be much more different to shooting somebody's hand. After creating this project, I've found that it's not that different. I think there's slightly different elements to it, but generally speaking, the hand and the face are giving me just as much information about the person as each other. I think that the person who would normally shy away from having a traditional portrait of their face is a little bit more comfortable when I'm photographing their hand, and in that sense they become more open and give more, and it almost balances out, because typically most people, when you photograph their face, they kind of shy away from it. The hand is more giving, and then it just finds itself in the middle. There's a balance where it's actually giving just as much as the face in my mind, which is why I came up with this terminology, or this term of a hand trait.
Agenda Brown. As I say, I'll link to the film, or I'll put the film on the show page, and I'll link to Agenda as well within the show notes. I realised today I haven't made a lot of pictures with you. You've been making the pictures. I've not been keeping my end of the bargain, have I? No, you haven't, Neil. I recognise that. Well, let me put that right and make a picture for one of my sketchbook pictures for the Photowalk show notes today. A tree, again, it's one of those moments of the sun. Well, the sun is, thank you, sun, for coming out just at the right appropriate moment. It's just illuminating one side of this tree. It's beautiful sort of tree with all these vines that have crept around it, sort of enveloping the tree. So one half has disappeared into darkness, and the other bit is very well illuminated by what is this beautifully warm sunshine when you appear. Hint, hint. Shutter speed 800th, 5.6, ISO 160. There we go. What amazing texture on this tree. Absolutely fantastic. Really wonderful. Right, so yes, the new assignments show starts on Monday, and it will be with Sean, the first one. And sometimes we'll have two from the same guest in a row, but generally we'll dip back and forth. Most of my guests that will be setting these challenges will have recorded 2, 3, possibly 4 for the assignments show. So and Sean kicks it off. I thought that would be fitting, really, to have a good friend kick it off on Monday. So to the second part of my conversation with John Mayer, former punk rocker turned VW engine tuner, and actually somebody who can build an engine on order from scratch for any VW you should mention. Any, Neil? Well, I'm saying any. I'm pretty confident that he could, which people do ask him to do around the world. He has this workshop on the island where he lives now, and he builds an engine literally from scratch. Phenomenally technical and clever thing to do, and self-taught. I'd love to travel to Harris anyway, but definitely I'd love to see John at work in his workshop doing that. And I tell you what, I bet we'd have a fascinating photo walk together. So this second part of my conversation with John, well, it has a real surprise, something that we've never done, and I can say that without fear of being wrong about this. Neil, so often you say things and we're not quite sure you're not remembering something that you did a while back, but no, this particular occasion, hand on heart, hold on. I know I can promise we've not done this before, coming up during the interview. But we'll start by continuing the conversation about these remote buildings that he's made pictures of on the island, which time has come close to forgetting, in a part of the world where, well, they're not destroyed by, here comes that phrase, the wandering ne'er-do-wells. Back with John Mayer for part 2.
So this wonderful project, Nobody's Home, is an exploration of the houses on the Isle of Harris that have been left abandoned, and often with the bedclothes still on the beds, it seems, or the chair facing the TV. And though nature is claiming back what was once hers, you could easily let your imagination persuade you that there might have been people sat in those seats only quite recently. Do you research the places you photograph to perhaps find out the story behind them?
No, I don't. Well, that very first exhibition that I did with a guy called Ian Patterson, Ian did make the effort to get in touch with people and find out a little bit about houses, whereas my approach was I'd find a location, I would photograph it, and I was quite happy. Like, I had a story about that house in my head, probably completely nothing to do with the real story. But the interesting thing is that as the pictures became more widely known, many people that had they were either connected with the house because it was a family thing or whatever, would get in touch, and I would learn about the story after the shot had been taken. And it was great, really, that some number of people made the trouble to get in touch. And you do, when they first do that, you can't help but think, they might not be happy about this. But actually, in each instance, we ended up having a really good chat, and they. I guess if that was your grandmother's house or something, obviously it's going to stir some sort of emotion. Absolutely. But I think they kind of also, it's a bit sad for them, but in a way they like seeing it, better than it not being documented at all, because many of those houses no longer exist.
My mind goes into overdrive, John, when I see these sort of places. I've probably watched Blair Witch far too often, but I'm assuming you're fearless.
Well, on Harris, you just think, well, it's such a safe environment. I can go out, and I've done things like set up long exposure photographs that last maybe half an hour to an hour. When you wanted to get star trails and stuff, and I've literally just left the camera. It's like, I'm standing here for an hour, and I go back to the van and have a few cups of coffee and a packet of Jaffa cakes or whatever, and you just know the key's not going to get nicked and so. But there was one house that I went into. It was at night, and I'd set up. I was lighting the interior, and then I heard a noise. And it was literally it was just from outside of the window. And you're telling yourself, oh, it must be a sheep or something, that's brushed up against something. But then you hear a noise again. And then I find that it's possible, if you let your mind go down that route, you can really start freaking out and think, I'll come back for my gear in the morning in daylight.
Leave the Jaffa cakes where they are. But the photography's taken on a sort of, looking at your website now, it's taken on a more commercial feel of late as well. You're now photographing interiors and exteriors for businesses, is that right? Yeah. I've just had a recent one. I've been 4 times now. There's a massive sort of iconic thing on the island up near Stornoway, Arnish Fabrication Yard. Right. I think it first came about in the 70s, fabricating stuff for oil rigs, offshore oil rigs and so on. And it's gone through various periods of boom and bust. Companies take it over and money's funneled into it, and then it goes bust again and all the jobs are lost. And anyway, it's back up and running again, and I got invited to go along and shoot various stages of it. It's like the first time steel had been brought in, and it's a place actually that for years I've often thought I'd love to get inside there, and I've never sort of got round to going and asking anybody, but now I've been asked to go and do it, and like I say, I've been back 4 times now. And it's things like that also, I find, you get chatting to some of the guys that work there, and you come away having learned something more about the island as a result of it. It's like with talking to family members that own some of those old abandoned houses. You just learn so much about the place. And if it wasn't for me getting into photography, there'd be a lot of things about the island that I would be
totally unaware of.
Well, this is the conversation I have so often with photographers is the E word, enabler. I must use that word almost every single interview, so I apologise if you've heard me roll it out many times. But John, it is, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I suppose it's a bit like, if you've got a dog, when you go walking the dog, you bump into people and get chatting to folk. And if you don't have a dog, you probably don't go out walking, especially when the weather's horrendous. But yes, I found it really the whole that aspect of the photography. I don't go out searching, thinking that this is going to make me get in touch with people. I haven't done that at all. I regarded going out with a camera as a very solitary, solo thing. Which for the most part it is, but those side effects of, like I say, this thing of sort of educating myself about how things are working on the island, what goes on, what's happened in the past. You hear some amazing stories.
Yeah. Salton Sea, which is quite a way away from the Hebrides, a 21st century twilight zone, the place, quote, where the American dream died. I did go and visit your blog post on this, a beautifully awful paradise post. Tell us about the place, because it's a fascinating, almost apocalyptic fascination that you had for it.
Yeah. It's you probably know the story briefly. I mean, it was going to be the 1950s, 60s sort of version of Palm Springs, but with a massive lake there, and it kind of all sadly went wrong. And everybody that had sunk their money into it, either the great thing, I don't know. I must be attracted to places. This dereliction.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
The fact that people still live there, because the probably some of the rich out-of-towners that could buy a second property there, when it all turned wrong in the 70s and they had to, jettison, get out, the people who sort of put their money in there, they weren't rich. They had no option and they stayed there. And meanwhile, the place just gradually starts falling to pieces. And I'd seen stuff on the internet about it, but the clincher was a film that John Waters made about it, Plagues and Pleasures on the Salton Sea. I could thoroughly recommend that. Absolutely fantastic. And when you watch that, and he went round talking to many of the characters that live there, and a few oddballs and stuff, and it's just visually fascinating, and it does attract. I mean, I'd seen Troy Paver been there a good few times taking pictures, and the prospect of going, if we had a holiday, me and my wife Helen going on holiday over to California. Well, I absolutely insisted that I had to incorporate a trip to Salton Sea, and even timed it so that we were there for a few days around the full moon. So that was me traipsing around there at night in some dodgy looking places.
I was going to say, and rattlesnake country as well. Come to that.
In fact, on one of the campsites, we were sat there around the little fire pit that we got going, and there was this rattlesnake came along that was just a few feet away. I mean, it's really, I'd never seen one before, not in the flesh. So.
Has Helen agreed to go on holiday with you since then?
Fortunately, we didn't. There was a good few articles about Salton Sea and that area. Didn't read them until after we came back, and I think if we'd read them before we'd gone, there's no way. Well, we wouldn't have gone.
You've definitely got an affinity for those sort of places, as you said, though. So I'm wondering if we're going to see more. I know the phrase now is urbex, more urban exploration. Maybe we're going to see more from you.
Well, maybe. I don't know. I kind of just go with the flow, really, and stumble into these projects. There was a project that I've still got in mind to do. I actually was hatching the plan to do it just at the start of lockdown, when the hardcore lockdown, when I was thought if I drive up to Lewis, I could probably get stopped by the police. And it was inspired by the American photographer Stephen Shaw, and that amazing book of photos of his, I think it's called Uncommon Places. And he basically in the 70s, he drove around the US with a large format camera, and he was shooting just fairly, you might call it sort of mundane street scenes. But when you look at them today, it's just like there's one particular picture of his I've got in mind. It's just at some sort of crossing in the road, and there are people waiting to cross. There are cars at the traffic lights waiting to go, and it's like, well, yeah, 70s American cars. It instantly sets it in an era, and the clothes that the people are wearing. So I just got me thinking of like, well, I'm not in America, I'm in the Hebrides, but a bit like when I got into night photography, you know, watching the Troy Paver stuff, well, we haven't got like deserted diners and 1950s Cadillacs knocking about that I can photograph, but the Hebrides has its own stuff, you know, and I think the large format camera is going to get resurrected again, and I'm going to try, the idea is to shoot stuff that somehow I'm going to make sure that there are things in each picture that kind of dates it. So that might even be just like a petrol station that's got the display of how much it is per litre. And you can imagine looking back at that in 30 years' time and thinking they were really paying that much for fuel. You know, I don't know, people walking along the street with a mobile phone. Maybe they'll still be doing that 20 years from now.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it described as being a historian in your pictures, you know, where you can date them.
Yeah. I find that type of photography to me is far more interesting than, you know, you go out and get the landscape and the sunset sort of thing. I might actually learn something from those pictures. So I think I just kind of go along with whatever's going to crop up. But I'd always like to have a little idea of a project bubbling away in the back of my head. Always got to have something to be pondering on.
Just finally, John, if you were to be cast away on another island, a bit more remote than even the Outer Hebrides, what would you take with you if you only allowed one of the following? A set of drums, split-screen camper, or your camera and as many chemicals as you need to process your pictures?
Oh, right. The camper would be any use to me. I'd be tempted to go with the drum kit.
Would you? Because
I've got one right behind me here, this mini little studio thing. Yeah, I still dabble with that. Yeah. And I still find it something that, the weird thing is, you can look at things on YouTube and you see people doing these little drum tutorials and stuff. Because when I was first learning, I didn't have any of that.
No.
I had to hope that Top of the Pops was on. You were sat there watching it, hoping that they would show a clip of the drummer for a bit so you could see what the hell he was doing. Yeah. Or the other option was to go and watch a band live and see what they were doing, because, you know, how else could I learn? Whereas now, I've gone on watching some of these YouTube tutorials, and then I can remember a good few years ago, there's a guy doing Bernard Purdy. He was doing the Purdy Shuffle on this, and I didn't have a drum kit in the house at the time, but I did have one in the workshop, which is 9 miles away. And I watched that tutorial about 3-4 times, and I thought, right, so I'm nipping down the workshop, but I've got to do this. So you still learn that. Yeah, I think I could while away a lot of time with the drum kit. Yeah, the camera thing's close second.
Can you still do the Purdy Shuffle?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Could you? Would you be able to do it now if you went to your drums now behind you?
Yeah. Okay. First time I've ever done the Purdy Shuffle during an interview. Right, just bear with me while I swap seats. Get over here. Here we go.
A different thing for us. Oh, he's on.
Purdy Shuffle.
Yes, that I'll let you get back to your seat. The Purdy Shuffle. There's a first. I'd never heard of that. Mind you, I'm not a drummer, but I'd not heard of that before.
It's such a well-known thing, and it is just a beautiful thing to master when you're learning drums.
What do you think the animals on the island would think of the Purdy Shuffle? They'd love it, probably.
Well, when you're battering away on a drum kit, you don't give a toss what anybody else thinks, do you? So tough luck.
Spoken like a proper drummer from Buzzcocks.
See, I told you we hadn't done that before. Drumming on the show, Neil. Whatever next? Fantastic. John Mayer. A real privilege to talk to John. And as I say, I'd love to go to Harris. That's my way, John, of inviting myself out to come and see you. It wasn't very subtle, was it? No. For links to John and all the photographers we mentioned, plus pictures from the Photowalks, follow the link in the podcast player app, which will take you to today's show page. Oh, the sun's come out again. Quick, Neil, make a picture. A contrasty evening picture. Pop you in my pocket quickly. Hold on. Along the path. We've had everything today. We've had this wonderful contrasty sun with the shadows, and we've had rain. We've had sleet. Oh God, we've had everything. So here we go. It's a footpath. It's a sketchbook image, but it's where I've been walking today. Shutter speed 480. Let's go F4, and here we go. Rescue you from the pocket. There we go. Yes, if you're a patron, it's the More show tomorrow, and I'll tell you what's on that after we have our play-out song. But before the play-out song, here's the PS for this week, and it comes from a Swiss photographer called Frank Dussault, who we must talk to on the show. We really must. He's a freelance artistic director whose photography focuses, if you pardon the pun, on the personal series projects. And I did allude to this earlier during the show today. And such projects, things like On My Way, which is all about the journeys we make, and in his case, on aircraft. I did something like this myself called, was it 23 or 24? It was 20-something. The hours spent on an airliner going to Sydney. One picture every hour. I don't sleep on airliners at all very well. So it wasn't difficult to wake up and think, okay, picture, click. Neil, it's not about you. I know, we're talking about Frank. But Frank's also done a set of really strong Polaroid projects rather. And look, I'll link to them on the show page today. But as I say, he's also an artistic director. And I think that plays into these wonderful designs, postcards that he sends to people with encouraging and inspirational messaging on them and within them. For some of them, they're quite extraordinary designs. And I got some of his postcards in the post. I've had some before. I've mentioned Frank before, and I got a set the other day, which I was absolutely thrilled to receive. And he sent me a note with it. Let me just grab the note. It's in my pocket. Hold on. This will blow away because it started getting windy again. Can you hear it? We can, Neil. Yes. Quick. I'll try and stop the paper blowing away. Dear Neil, I heard that you received my card. Yes, I did. Thank you so much. I thought I'd written back to you. Did I not write? Oh, listening to your podcast, I know that you like quotes. So I went to my archives of old cards that I sent in previous years. I always work around or include a message within it. I know you do, and they're fabulous. I hope you'll find some of them inspiring. Thanks again for the podcast. Best, Frank. Let's put the paper away. Handwritten note. I love handwritten notes. Fantastic. Thank you, Frank. So here's some of the quotes that were on the cards that Frank sent. Replace the fear. So these are our PSs this week. Things for you to think about. Replace the fear of the unknown with curiosity. Ooh, good. Like that. Life is, this is good considering that we've been talking about rock and roll today. Life is like a party. Nobody knows how it's going to end, but we came to rock it. Yes. And then this one. Don't count the days, make the days count. Wonderful. Don't count the days, make the days count. I'll link to Frank on the show page. In the meantime, shall we have our play-out song for this week? The song that's for us to finish a walk together, making our final few frames together. This is Anthony Lazzaro. I love Anthony Lazzaro as an artist. The song is called Old Sweater, and I think because we've been talking about old buildings I like the way that this song sounds in particular. There's a sort of rain and the static on the song. So I thought this would be a fitting end to today's show. A good play-out song on the Photowalk.
I am bright like a sun. You were my nova on the run, and I float in the wake of midnight to daybreak. When the winter chill froze it to the bone, you could always find your way back home to your little shelter from the storm. And if you're feeling left out by the weather, you could always wear your whole sweater. It was lying there the whole time. Trials, slips and setbacks, somehow I wish we could wind back the clock, back to those days before you got on that stupid plane. The chill freezes to the bone, you can always find your way back home to a little shelter from the storm. And if you're feeling roughed up by the weather, you can always wear your cold sweater. It's been waiting here all this time. The chill freezes to the bone, you can always find your way back home to a little shelter from the storm. And if you're feeling roughed up by the weather, you can always wear your cold sweater. It's been waiting here all this time.
Wonderful Old Sweater from Anthony Lazzaro. And that's it for this week. My thanks to John Mayer, the late Tom Stoddart, words too from Carol Guzzi and Agenda Brown, and those who are patrons, which you can join through the link on the website, photographydaily.show. And for those wonderful supporters who are, tomorrow is the More Diaries show. It's your own weekend oasis of a little extra for your kind support. And we're going to be talking about a murder mystery project. Such a great idea. And those small ideas, they often are, aren't they? 5 things I love about photography from Peter Geiser, and fitness and photography and Wim Hof, and cold water therapy. All right, I'm turning the temperature to 0 for you. Monday, we're back here with a new assignment show, one set by YouTuber and photographer Sean Tucker. And then next Friday, Magnum's Alex Soth is my guest. Music on the show from the amazing artlist.io. Production assistants from Neil Ford and Emily Renier. And I look forward to photographing with you, hearing from you and talking with you next time.
Photography Daily is a Loading Zone production.